Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
Japan's surprise attack on an American naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, shocked the nation and launched the United States into World War II. On the U.S. Pacific coast, many Americans worried they would be Japan's next target. Suspicion and fear of anyone who looked like the enemy split communities apart. This was especially true in California, where many immigrants from Japan lived with their American-born children and grandchildren. In February 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed an order allowing the military to remove any and all persons from areas necessary for national defense. The Army defined the entire West Coast, home to the majority of Japanese Americans, as a military area. Within weeks, more than 100,000 Japanese Americans on the West Coast were ordered to evacuate. Allowed to take only what they could carry, they had to sell or give away nearly everything they owned: furniture, homes, pets, businesses, and report to assembly centers. Those who wouldn't leave voluntarily were forcibly removed by the Army. At first, most families were held in temporary detention areas until longer-term camps could be built. Between May and October of 1942, the government opened 10 internment camps in remote areas, mostly in the West. Officially known as relocation centers, they were in reality more like prisons. Conditions were harsh. Detainees were housed in wooden barracks that offered little protection from extreme temperatures. 7 or 8 people had to share a single room. With no freedom to come and go, it was clear they were prisoners, and no one knew when, if ever, they'd be released. Internees tried to make the camps more livable. They set up makeshift schools and churches. Doctors, nurses, and dentists set up clinics. Volunteers built basketball hoops and baseball diamonds. Meanwhile, the government established Americanization programs, such as Boy Scout troops and citizenship classes, even though some 2/3 internees were U.S.-born citizens. Japanese Americans were confined for more than 2 years. Then in December 1944, the Supreme Court ruled that the government could not detain loyal citizens without criminal charges. Within weeks, the Army relaxed its restrictions on Japanese Americans. Gradually, internees were allowed to return home. World War II ended in September 1945, just weeks after the U.S. dropped atomic bombs on 2 cities in Japan. But it wasn't until March of 1946 that all 10 internment camps were closed. Though finally free, many Japanese Americans had lost everything and had to start their lives over. In time, most managed to rebuild their lives, but painful memories remained. 4 decades later, the U.S. government acknowledged the grave wrong done to so many of its people. In 1988, President Ronald Reagan signed a bill providing an official apology and $20,000 each to surviving detainees.
My fellow Americans, we gather here today to right a grave wrong. More than 40 years ago, shortly after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, 120,000 persons of Japanese ancestry living in the United States were forcibly removed from their homes and placed in makeshift internment camps. This action was taken without trial, without jury. It was based solely on race, for these 120,000 were Americans of Japanese descent.
Today, former detainees and their descendants are determined to keep that tragic story alive, as a reminder that this nation must never again commit such an injustice.